Hi, folks. Thanks for joining us today for this DAP Introduction to the Basics. Thank you for finding us on our new URL. We had a little bit of a technical issue where we had to start a new YouTube Live, so we're just going to hold for another 2 minutes or so to make sure everyone who potentially clicked on the original link is able to get here, and then we'll get started in just about 2 minutes. Thanks. All right, let's go ahead and get started. Again, thanks for everyone who's on the call today for this DAP learning series on an introduction to the basics. My name's Tim Loudon, and I'm the DAP program manager here at GSA. I'm joined today by Freddie Blicker, who's my partner in crime and my colleague who is an analyst on the DAP program with me, and also by our Digital Government University team led by Janelle Thalls. Again, we apologize for having to switch up the URL at the last minute there, but for those of us that found us here, thank you for joining us. Before we get started, I do want to note a few things. The first is everybody will get a copy of these slides after the presentation, so you don't have to be worried about not getting any of this information. The next is that after the presentation, we will also be sending a satisfaction survey, and we really appreciate if everyone could fill that out. We take into account all of your comments and try to make sure that we make these trainings as best we can. Also, you will note that if you're watching on YouTube right now, you will have a link to the chat function. And while I'm speaking, Freddie will be monitoring the chat and answering questions there, but also feeding questions to me at the Q&A period, and vice versa for when Freddie's speaking. I do want to give a warning that this is our longest virtual training. We have it scheduled 1 to 4. It may not go the complete length, but in the past, sometimes it has, depending on questions or what kinds of tangents we go on. So thanks all for bearing with us. We do think that this gives you a really good basis into Google Analytics, and specifically the digital analytics program if you're a new user. We will take 2 breaks throughout this because it's such a long training. So we shoot for having an hour of instruction followed by a short break, and so on until we get to the end of the training. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. Firstly, what is the DAP program? For those of you who are new users to DAP, the program basically has a few major parts. The first is that you get a Google Analytics premium product that GSA purchases and maintains, and it's at no cost to the agencies that use it. So that has a bunch of benefits. Well, I'll talk about those in another slide. We also offer trainings such as this one, and we have all of our past trainings in our YouTube channel, which you'll get links to both in the follow-up and they're in the slides here. We try to do probably about 8 or 9 virtual trainings per year, and we have our whole schedule planned out for this year. We also offer implementation support. So for those of you who might not already be DAP users who managed to find this call, we do help your developers, and if you're a developer yourself, be able to implement the script tag that you need to collect data for the DAP Google Analytics account. And we have one-on-one help desk support led by my illustrious colleague, Freddie, as well as a public window into the DAP data. We also manage analytics.usa.gov, which you can see here. If you haven't seen it before, feel free to go and check it out. It's basically taking some of the data we collect and putting it into a public dashboard format. So what are the differences between the DAP Google Analytics account and what I usually call an independent Google Analytics account, which would be an account that's managed by your agency that you control and you grant access to? So as I noted before, DAP is provided by GSA, and it uses a premium version of Google Analytics, which gives you a bunch of added features. As far as I know, there are maybe only a little more than a half dozen, maybe 6 or 7 premium versions of Google Analytics in all of government. They're quite pricey, and they do come with some benefits, including, for example, you don't have what we call the hit cliff. So if you're using a free version of Google Analytics and you have more than 10 million hits per month, the data will theoretically hit the cliff and you'll stop recording data. So if you had 10 million page views by February 15th, then the last 13 days of the month, you wouldn't actually record any data. Another big plus for Google Analytics Premium, or actually they just renamed it, it's now called Analytics 360. But another big thing there is that you have access to reports that Google Analytics Free does not have, such as the funnel report, which we're going to show you towards the end of the training, as well as you can unsample your reports, which is maybe the biggest benefit. In Google Analytics Free, if you're trying to pull data for a long period of time, like, for example, an annual report, which we see a lot of folks trying to do around the September timeframe, the data is most likely going to be sampled. With Analytics 360 or Google Analytics Premium, you can actually hit a button to do an unsampled report. And with Google Analytics Free, you can't do that. So if you're trying to get data for a year, you might have to break it into smaller chunks and then add everything up manually. Whereas it's a little easier by just hitting an unsampled report in the Google Analytics Premium version. So we also use a common tag page code. So it's a script tag that you would implement, and most people on the call probably already have it on their sites. Unfortunately, with DAP, you can't link to Search Console because of the way Search Console is configured, but Freddie's going to talk about Search Console in a little while and how you can link it to your own independent version of Google Analytics. And our account is designed to be able to have data aggregate. So not only can you get information as granular as a single page click on a page, but you can scope that out to look across your site or all of your agency sites or even everything across government and where your site might stand on with different metrics and dimensions. In contrast, I kind of touched on all the independent stuff here, but it doesn't have some of the features that DAP has. But your independent account can link with Search Console, which could be a big benefit. So we typically actually recommend that websites have both the DAP implementation and an independent implementation of Google Analytics Free, both on their pages. That allows you to take advantage of all the features, but also have the added stuff that we have. Last big thing about the DAP account is that we have already encoded some events for you. So events you have to create yourself. And we track things like outbound link clicks, downloads of documents, mail to clicks, telephone clicks, a bunch of things like that. And those wouldn't be, by default, recorded in an independent version of Google Analytics. You have to configure them yourself. OK. Whew, let me take a sip of water. Now, to start off at the very basic, what is Google Analytics? It's basically a JavaScript code that is able to record a bunch of data. And if you've taken a training with us before, you may have heard me talk about the analogy where as you travel around the internet, it's as if you're wearing a backpack. And within that backpack, you have a bunch of information: what browser you're using, how long you were on the site, where you came from to get to a site, what pages you're visiting, and so on and so on. Google Analytics, basically, when the JavaScript fires, it opens up your backpack and reads all that information that you carry around with you while you're on the web, and then sends it into a database so that we can use it for reporting. So data in Google Analytics is classified into two big buckets. There are dimensions and metrics. I used to say that the difference between them is that metrics are numbers, but there are actually specific instances where numbers can be dimensions. Instead, think about it this way. Metrics are countable things that it's a measurement and you can count, whereas dimensions are, they describe data. They're descriptive. They might be a word. Usually they're words. They're not usually numbers. So let's do an example here. So if I have a dimension category of city, the possible returns might be something like San Francisco, Berlin, or Singapore. In contrast, if I have a metric category of area or a metric category of population, those are things that we can count. So area in square miles, obviously you can count that, and population, the number of people. So together we use dimensions and metrics to make reports where, and this is an example of a report that, unfortunately we can't get things like population in Google Analytics, but you can see how you can set up dimensions and metrics to have a specific descriptor and then specific things that you can count about that descriptor. Hope that makes sense. So our first quick exercise is a question for you. And I know we haven't talked a lot about specific terminology yet, but if folks could just go ahead and in the chat box, tell me which of these is a metric. A, social source, B, landing page, C, pages per session, or D, month of the year. And Freddie's going to tell us what answers we're getting here. Actually, I can look in the chat too.
Yep, I don't see any answers yet. So if everyone would type in what they think the answer is, we'll start communicating those. Yep, so I'm seeing a couple people choosing C. Yep, majority of people are choosing C.
That's because people are smart. All right, well, thank you, Freddie. Congrats to the folks that chose C. That is the correct answer, and I'm glad that you were able to infer what some of these different terms meant. But yes, pages per session is the answer, because that's something we can count. How many pages did someone visit in their session? And we'll talk about the specific meaning of what a session is later. But social source would be something like Twitter or Facebook, so it's a descriptor. Landing page would be the URL of the first page of a visit, and month of year, obviously, is the month of the year. So well done to the folks that chose C. All right, let's talk about some of this terminology so we have an idea of what's going on. There are all kinds of different terms that are used in Google Analytics, and later on I include a link to a glossary where you can actually go and check them all out yourself, but I do want to go over some of the main ones so that we have a basis. The first term that we definitely need to have a good grasp on is a page view. And a page view is any time a page loads, and that includes hitting the back arrow. So as an example, if I go here to USA.gov and I click on branches of government, this page loads right here, USA.gov/branches of government. That is a page view for this page. If I hit the refresh button, the page reloads. That is another page view for this page. If I hit the back button and go back to the home page, this is a page view for USA.gov. And then if I hit the forward button and go back to branches of government, that is yet another page view for/branches of government. So now I've had 3 page views for branches of government. I clicked on the page, I refreshed it, I went back, and then I went forward. So every time the page loads, it consists, a page view is tracked. So that's the most sort of granular level of the page analysis. Then we have a unique page view, which is something that I don't talk about too much, but the idea is that there can only be one unique page view per session. And we're going to talk about session in a second. But basically, that means where I had 3 total page views of branches of government, I really only had 1 unique page view. That's a little confusing, but we don't use unique page view too much. Okay, now, going a little further into sort of the funnel, if page view is the most granular sort of tracking we do on this type of page, a session is a little bit larger. So in my back on my USA.gov travels here, I had 3 page views in branches of government. I had a couple page views on the home page. I could go to other things here like mortgages. I could continue to click as long as I stay within USA.gov. A session is the entire amount of time a user is in the host domain. So this is USA.gov. As long as I'm in USA.gov, I can have 100 page views in this specific site, and it will constitute a single session. So again, I can have 1 page view in a session, I can have 100. Now, what's interesting to keep in mind about this is that by default, DAP tracks every subdomain as a separate session. So if I went from, for example, there's USA.gov, and then there's also a Spanish version of the site called gobierno.usa.gov. There might be a link for it here. So right here. So if I click on the Spanish version, Español, and I go to gobierno.usa.gov, I actually started a new session on this site. So keep in mind that if you have a site that transfers people to a subdomain, it will, by default in DAP, constitute a new session. Okay. Session was formerly called visit. If you worked in Google Analytics past maybe 5 or 6 years ago, they had the actual dimension called visit, but then they switched it. And similarly, we used to have something called visitor, and visitor is now called user. So now we've gone from single page view loads to a session consisting of the entire time someone's in the site, and now we have a user. And that is a person who visits a site. And one user might have many sessions. So if I go back here and I go back to my normal USA.gov, I can visit this site today, and I can have 50 page views in 3 sessions. And then tomorrow, I can come back and visit again and have 50 more page views in 2 sessions. And that will be 100 total page views over the 2 days. It will be 5 total sessions, but I will be 1 user. And the way that Google knows that I'm 1 user is when I visit the site with the Google Analytics tag on it, it places a cookie in my browser. And when I return, it sees that cookie and it knows it's me. So because of that, I have my little guy falling in the manhole here as a way to signify that I need to tell you about a pitfall. So user is a metric, or users is a metric that can be a little deceiving. They classify them in total users as well as new versus returning users. And because users are tracked with cookies, there are various different ways this number can not be descriptive of how many actual humans visit your site. Because if I, for example, visit USA.gov on my personal laptop, my work laptop, my personal phone, and my work phone, or I go to a library or something like that, every time I visit, I'm going to look like a new user. So what I'm always telling a lot of folks when they're getting started with Google Analytics is that, number one, personally, I prefer to use session as a type of metric that I'm reporting on, because I feel like the definition of it is a bit more defined. But secondly, if you're going to look at users in your reporting, don't set goals to try to say, we want 20,000 users, and think that that means 20,000 humans, because it very likely does not. Beyond the different device issue, also, if I clear my cookies, when I return to a site, I would be a new user. So what we usually try to encourage folks to do is, instead of talking about specific numbers, talk about percentage increase or decrease. So even though user is not a perfect measurement of humans, it's measured the same way every time you use it. So if from January to February you had a 10% increase in users, that can still be taken as something that's a good outcome. So rather than set goals for specific numbers, we always say we recommend setting goals for percentages, and I think that will lead you on a better path. Okay, a couple more, and then we'll be able to move on to some more fun stuff. Bounce rate. So bounce rate is a term that I feel like when folks first get started in Google Analytics, everyone's all about page views. How many page views did this page get? And everyone wants to feel like page views is the be-all, end-all of a successful site. And unfortunately, that's not the case. The next sort of metric that folks get really excited about is bounce rate. And bounce rate is the percentage of sessions where a user lands on a single page and does not view another page. So here's an example. If I were to click back on gobierno.usa.gov, I now have constituted a new session, a new page view. I'm on the gobierno.usa.gov homepage. If I decide, oh, that's not what I wanted, and I go back to usa.gov, that was a single page session, and that constitutes a bounce. So you've got bounces as a raw number, and then bounce rate, which would mean of all the sessions that are coming into that are being visited on your site, how many of them are resulting in a bounce? So there's all kinds of sort of things that we could talk about, and we will talk about regarding bounce rate. A lot of people like to think that bounce rate in general, if it's high, it's a bad thing. I don't think that's necessarily always the case, but we'll talk more about that later. The other thing is that events, when you have an event, it can confound a bounce rate. But again, that's something we'll get into in a bit. Okay, last couple terms. Source and medium. So Google does this a solid, and they actually take two different dimensions, source and medium, and they created a dimension where they put them together for us. So without trying to be ironic, a medium is a source of a traffic type, and the source specifies that. And basically, that definition means nothing until you look at the examples, and it makes more sense. For example, you can have Google/organic, meaning the medium is organic traffic, and organic traffic refers to traffic coming from search engines, whether that be Google or Yahoo or Bing or Ask Jeeves, whatever you'd like to use. And then the source is the more specific platform that it came from. So another example might be Twitter/social. The medium is social media, and the specific source is Twitter. Could also be Facebook or whatever you decide to use. So this is a way for you to get an idea on where traffic is coming from before it gets to your site. So are people doing searches on Google? Are they clicking on social media posts? Are they being referred from other sites? All kinds of stuff like that. So source medium is a really, really powerful dimension to keep track of, and we're going to be using that in a lot of our examples today. Okay, moving on. Referral. A referral is a visit to your site based on a link from a third-party site. So for example, if your site is, or your agency, for example, is covered in the Washington Post, let's hope for a good reason. And the Washington Post has a link to the site. When someone clicks on the link from Washington Post and they land on your site, that will be a referral. And there's another dimension, well, referrals is a metric, it's a number, and then the dimension full referrer shows what exact page that person came from. So it might be WashingtonPost.com/USDA unveils new site or something like that. And then you'll be able to understand not only if you have a source medium that says Washington Post/referral, you'll be able to get a better understanding of the specific page where that click happened. And theoretically, I mean, in actuality, clicks coming from social media are a type of referral. If you're clicking on Twitter or Facebook or something like that, it is someone clicking on a link on a different site that is leading to your site. But Google has sort of, they understand that social media traffic is a little bit different. And so they've classified referrals coming from social media outlets that like they've defined a bunch. They have Twitter and Facebook and Reddit and Instagram and LinkedIn and all these things. And when a referral comes from one of those sites, it will funnel it into the social media category. Okay, that was a lot there, but you can see in the slides, I've also included a link so that you can see a glossary of a whole bunch of other terms. And if you ever are questioning what something means that you see in Google Analytics, google.com is your best friend. Go ahead and just type in Google Analytics plus the term, and you'll find information about it. Okay, so here's a little activity. I'm going to ask you questions that you can answer in your own head. You don't have to answer them in the chat. But let's imagine that this big blue arrow is a session. And within this session, we view page 1, and then we view a different page, and then let's say we hit the back button, and we go back and we view page 1 again. So in this particular session, I guess after this third page, we exit, we leave the site. Oops, I hit the button. My fault. So I was going to ask you, how many page views does page 1 have? So in this case, we have right here and right here. So within the session, page 1 has 2 page views. Now I'll ask you, how many page views does page 2 have? If you thought 1, good job. There's only 1 page view here for page 2. How many page views were there across the session? 3. Pretty straightforward. We viewed page 1 twice, but we had 3 pages load. So 3 total page views in the session. Now, here's where it gets tricky. Remember I told you about unique page views. There can only be 1 unique page view for each page per session. So, for page 1, think in your head, how many unique page views does it have in this session? You got it, 1. Because even though we visited the page twice, in this session, there can only be 1 unique page view for each page. How about for page 2? Obviously 1. And then how many unique page views across the session? 2. Great. Okay, new term, entrances. Entrances is a metric that counts for a specific page how many times it was the first page of a session. Again, I'll repeat that. An entrance is a measurement of how many times a page was the first page in a session. It goes along with the dimension called landing page. So we're going to talk lots about landing pages later. How many entrances does page 1 have? 1, because here it is, the first page of the session. When we entered it over here, well, we didn't enter it over here because it wasn't an entrance. It was just a part of a session. How many entrances does page 2 have? If you said 0, you're correct. It was not the first page of the session. And how many entrances did the session have? Not really applicable because a session can only ever have 1 entrance. Then finally, we have pages per session, which is a count of all the pages in the session. So how many would that be? 3. I hope that made sense to everyone. If you have questions, go ahead and put them in the chat box, and Freddie can either answer them or relay them to me at our question and answer period in just a few minutes. Okay. So moving on. As I said, most folks start with looking at a single metric like page views, or in this case, we said visits, which would be sessions. And you log into Google Analytics and you say, oh, we got tons of visits a month. You go to your boss and you say, where's my bonus? We've done well. But in reality, that's not really the determinant of a successful site. The idea of most government sites, being that most government sites are information sites, is getting the right content to the right people at the right time. So straight page views or sessions count can be warm if you're achieving your goals, but they are definitely not the be-all, end-all of achieving your goals. Because just because folks have a lot of page views doesn't mean they're actually receiving the content you're hoping that they receive or being able to complete the actions you want them to complete. So how do we know if we're achieving that? Well, we got to look at everything in context. We can't talk about a single metric. And remember I told you about bounce rate. So bounce rate is a metric that I feel like a lot of folks look to try to assess whether or not they have, a quote unquote good site or a quote unquote successful site. But in reality, bounce rate, if you look at it as a very high level metric and without context, doesn't really tell you much. So as I noted, bounce rate is how many folks come to a specific site and then navigate away after only viewing one page. There's this really famous blogger who's kind of like, people call him the godfather of Google Analytics. His name's Avinash Kaushik, and he defines it as I came, I puked, I left, which is a bit harsh maybe, but that's how he does it. So a high bounce rate theoretically is anything over 50%. But notice how it says for non-blog sites. And I would even go further and say, I do not look at bounce rate on a site as a whole. I think it's much more of a page level metric. And this will make more sense when we talk about the landing page report. But as an example, and I don't know if we have any folks from, let's say, the National Park Service on the call right now, but if the National Park Service sends out like an all points bulletin via social media and maybe via email or their apps or things like that, and they direct people to a page that has a press release about a man-eating bear in Yellowstone National Park, they sure as heck don't care if the visitors that come and read about the man-eating bear go and visit the rest of the site. In that specific case, a high bounce rate is fine, because as long as people are reading it, that's the goal of that particular post. So I prefer to look at bounce rate at a page level. If you have a very high bounce rate on your homepage, like 75%, that is definitely something to look at. That can point to issues with potentially your SEO. Maybe folks are putting in keywords in Google and they're landing on your page, but they don't really actually want to be at that site. It can also mean that your navigation might be too difficult for user experience. And when a user starts a session on the homepage, they get frustrated and they just leave. Or it could be pointing at page performance. Maybe the page doesn't load quick enough and it's leading people away. So that's a homepage. By contrast, if you're talking about blogs, I really don't feel like having a blog post on a specific topic that you direct people to specifically from like a social media post. If folks read that blog post, that's probably a success. And I don't know if bounce rate in this case is something that would really bother you. So it's really dependent on what your goals are and what you're trying to get your users to achieve. So here's a little description of what I just said. It might be good if you're, oh, interesting. This isn't actually for bounce rate. This is an improper slide. Oh, no, it is. Okay, so we've got bounce rate here. So the bad could be they didn't find what they were looking for on that first page and they left, or they didn't know the next action to take. But the good could be they found exactly what they needed and they left. And you can do it with almost any metric. So here's another example, pages per session. You might look at that in a vacuum and say, users are engaged and they're clicking on all sorts of pages. They're reading all our stuff. But the bad, and especially for government sites, might be the users are determined to find something, but they can't. And so they have to view 20 different pages in order to find what they're looking for. And I said this is specific to government because in a lot of cases, we're trying to provide things like forms or applications that people can't get anywhere else. So if you're trying to find out information about renewing your passport and you've got people visiting, 20 pages in a session to try to find that information out, they may be doing that because there's nowhere else they can go to get information about, renewing their passport. That was just an example. I'm not calling out the passport agency. They probably have a great site, just an idea. So you can see how looking at a metric in a vacuum really isn't going to do you much good. You really need to understand your goals. You need to understand the context and combine those metrics with other things. So, questions so far? If you have questions on this section, go ahead and put them in the chat box, and I can actually. Oh, Freddie, what have we got?
Well, we don't have any questions just yet, so let's see if anyone has anything coming in. Again, we're monitoring the chat box. So if you have any questions, feel free to pop those in there, and then we'll talk about those right now live with you.
Cool. Well, if there's nothing that was directed from that specific section, Freddie, I'll let you go ahead and answer them in the chat box, and we'll go ahead and move on.
Okay,
so
great.
Actually, this is a good segue. This is where I'm going to hand this off to Freddie, and we're going to be able to get our hands dirty, take a look at the interface, and look at some of the reports. So you get to move on from my boring talking about terms and actually learn some things in Google Analytics. So Freddie, go ahead and take it away.
Okay, great. Thanks, Tim. So this is really one of my favorite parts of this presentation that we're about to give you. We're really going to get our hands dirty. So Tim has given you a great overview of all the different metrics, dimensions, caveats, things to look out for that you're going to run into as we go through and learn and orientate you to the Google Analytics interface. So before I get into specific reports with the audience overview, let me just walk you through the Google Analytics interface. So after you've contacted us at the DAP team and you've gotten your username associated with Google and you have permissions to access the data, you'll be in DAP. So when you sign in, you will see a number of different accounts. You'll be choosing government-wide account, and more than likely your agency is listed here under the various views. For today's presentation, I am going to be using the GSA, which I have already selected. So when you first log in, you're going to see within the GSA profile, all of these reports on the left-hand side of your screen. So what is this? So we have a search bar up here. This is where you can search for different reports. So let's say if you want to search for landing page, you could do that. That's a really useful and easy way to find something if you're not sure, you don't have the time to go looking through the standard reports. You have a customization section. I'm not going to get into that. Tim's going to be speaking to custom reports later on in this discussion. You have a real-time report section where it gives you data in real time. So what you're seeing right now is the GSA currently has 9,584 active users on the site. You get to see the top active pages, top referrals, social traffic, top keywords, geography, the list goes on. Now, the beauty of this is Google Analytics slices and dices the data in a lot of different ways. So they are trying to help you by creating these pre-populated reports that we call standard reports right out of the box that you can go to and hopefully find and manipulate the data to answer whatever question you're trying to answer. So there's a lot of different things that you can look in real-time reports. I won't go through all of those. Now, over here under real-time, you'll see sections, report sections. You'll see audience, acquisition, behavior, and conversions. So for today, we're going to be speaking mostly about audience acquisition and behavior. So the audience section of reports, this is going to tell you the who. So this is your audience. The acquisition piece, this is going to tell you the how they found you, how they got to your website. And then finally, the behavior section of reports, this is going to tell you what your users are actually doing on your site. And we're going to dive deeper into this over the next bunch of slides in this presentation. So let's talk about the audience overview report. So as you can see, I've clicked into the overview and I'm looking at just a week's worth of data. And before we dive into all the different reports here, let's orientate you to what kind of the anatomy of a Google Analytics report. So you'll see here in the overview, Google shows you the name of the report. There's a bunch of different options up here, which Tim will speak to later about how you can export data. They give you a date picker. Now, this is going to be super important for when you actually go in and you're trying to understand that, choose the right dates. Now, typically what I like to do is I choose one day at a time. So you You could choose February 14th, click apply. And the reason I'm only doing 1 day is because it takes less time to process the data and render it. So typically you're not going to be pulling 1 day, you're going to be pulling perhaps a month of data. Now, the cool thing is you can go up to the date range, and Google pre-populates a lot of different date ranges up here for you automatically. So you could just choose today, you could choose yesterday, last week, last month, last 7 days, last 30 days. Really, they're designing it to try to make it as easy as possible for you to get the data that you need. Now, the really helpful feature here is you can compare current data to a previous period or a previous year. So let's say I want to compare February 14th of this year to February 14th of last year, for whatever reason. As you can see, it renders very quickly a comparison of 2018, February 14th, 2018 versus February 14th, 2017. And it gives you overview data of your users. So this date picker, you will see throughout all reports. And so this is really what you should be choosing first before you're looking at any type of data and trying to understand what the data means. So I'm going to revert back to just today, and I'm going to remove the comparison feature so that we can talk and speak to other parts of a basic report in Google Analytics. So you'll see here, this section up here, these are segments. Now Tim's going to be speaking to that later, so I won't go into that. But basically, you can create different types of logic that help you report across specific subsets of users or traffic or sessions, and see different data that way. So we'll cover that in a couple slides towards the end of this presentation today. So obviously we're an audience, so we are talking about your users. Now remember the terminology that Tim had already gone over. So we've got users, new users, then we have the associated sessions, and Google does a really good job of really kind of capturing all the metrics. So those are the numbers of your users. Now you'll see here you can look at demographics by users. Now this also assumes that you've implemented the demographic feature with DAP Google Analytics. So if you have not implemented that, you will not have any demographic data. But for the GSA site, obviously we have implemented this. So you can see demographics for language, obviously English, US English is the top language that we're recording within this report. You can see country. So we've got top 10 countries here. US is the top one. India comes in at second. You can do by city and see which cities are responsible for driving the most traffic, right? Now, this is pretty useful just to get a pulse of the data for your website, but it's not the end all be all. I want to dive a little bit more into looking at some of the different reports here. Now, this is a 101 course. This is an intro course. So we're not going to dive into every report, but I highly encourage you to just play around with it, click through these different reports, and see what the data looks like. Really, the whole purpose here is to get oriented with Google Analytics, understand what types of data it gives you, in what format it gives you, so that later on, when you get certain questions from your manager or from your developers, you're able to go in and find the data. So I'm going to skip down to demographics. So let's go there. So obviously we're still within the audience section, and I've clicked on demographics, and then I click on overview. Now, because we've implemented the demographics tracking feature here, we have age bands. So you can see here the age band of 35 to 44, at least for February 15th. Let me go back to February 14th. So there we go. There we have age bands for February 14th. So the 35 to 44-year-old age band is responsible for the majority of traffic on the GSA.gov website, right? It breaks it down by gender. And you can further drill down into this report, and it's all dynamic. You can drill down and see tables of data, which you can then create reports from to answer questions that you get from your boss or from your team or your development team. So this is fundamentally how Google Analytics works. You need to think about the type of question that you're trying to answer and then go to the correct report to get the data that answers that question. Now, we can go further into audience. There are interests data. So typically, we're not really using this, but there are data sets here on affinity categories. Basically, this is all the types of data that Google collects about you from when you log into your browser and you're searching for something on Google, right? If you click on an ad, if you, they look at your age by how you log in with your Gmail account and what types of information you've given Google. So this kind of represents more demographic kind of data about your users, but typically you're not really going to use the interest report for too much. This further breaks down and shows you geography. So I mentioned before in the overview tab, you could look at language, location. If you really wanted to drill down into language, you could do that, right? You could see English versus Spanish on certain websites and perhaps use that data to better improve Spanish versions of your websites. You can look at location. It's really, the possibilities here are endless. Now, I do want to point out, you can look at new versus returning visitors here under the behavior section, under audience. Per Tim, his point about users, there are caveats with this. So tread cautiously here when using new versus returning visitors. Typically, I recommend not reporting on new versus returning visitors. You're typically going to want to use sessions as your primary metric, because that encapsulates all the activity that somebody is actually doing on your website. And then obviously you'll have to figure out some way of defining what you define as a conversion on your particular website. What's really cool about this area in the audience section is the technology reports. So this is going to be really useful for any type of UX folks on the call, any type of web developers. So you can basically go in here and segment the data. So you look at just browser and OS and how different types of browsers compare. Now, Chrome is obviously the most popular browser. So as a UX person, perhaps you could log into DAP and then start using this data to say, oh, version 6.3.0 is performing better than version 6.4.0. Why is that, right? There were 112 sessions, 112,000 sessions 6.3 versus 67,000 sessions for 6.4. Why is that? So you could use this data to start to infer and identify trends about what types of technology you need to redesign certain parts of your website for. So this is really how you leverage this data to try to make decisions on what to improve on your website. Now, I can also mention here, we report on network. So there's a lot of interesting data here. This basically shows you service provider. There are ways to identify internal traffic at your agency and exclude that using service provider. So that's pretty interesting. Now, there is this value not set here. Now, I want to call that out. There's just some data that Google Analytics does not capture. And when you see a not set, that is more than likely what is happening. This is representative of just one day. So take this with a grain of salt. We are capturing service provider. So if you were to look at a month's worth of data, you likely wouldn't see not set there as the top result. So still staying within the audience section of reporting, let's look at mobile here. Now, everyone's thinking about mobile, how to redesign websites for mobile, how to cater to our mobile users. This is really important data, right? So you could just go into the mobile section and look at the breakdown of device type. So this is device category. This is the dimension. So this is really interesting data. So it breaks it out by desktop, mobile, tablet. And you can understand traffic and the share of traffic by each device type. So clearly here with the GSA for yesterday at least, about 80% of all traffic was on desktop. So about 16% was on mobile. So as a UX person or as perhaps a product manager, you're probably thinking about this data and how to use it. This would be one way of doing that. Okay, so I'm not going to go into any of these other reports here. These typically, we're not really using these all that much. And for an introduction course, we don't want to overwhelm you with everything. So I'm going to go forward in our slides and talk about some more reports. So let's talk about one of the most important reports in Google Analytics, and that is the Pages report. Now, this is within the behavior section. And this is the all pages report. So this is telling us what your users are doing on your site. So remember, audience tells you the who, behavior tells you the what. So we're going to go through all the different features here and talk about some filtering as well. So as you saw in the audience report, you have segments, you have the date picker, and you have your primary dimensions and your metrics. Now, typically, what most folks do when they log into Google Analytics and they have a page that they need to get traffic stats on, you're going to come to the all pages report. So this is going to be one of your most important reports. So again, for folks on the webcast, you're going to go to behavior, site content, and all pages. And if for whatever reason, as a new user, you're having trouble finding it, you can always type it in, remember, up here at the search bar and find it that way. Okay, so let's talk some more about this. So all pages essentially tells you an overview of what pages people are actually browsing on your site. So you'll see here there's an other value. This typically happens when certain data descriptors are stripped from traffic. I'm going to choose week worth of data to see how this changes. So I'm choosing January 7th through the 13th. And let's see what this looks like after I do that. Now, one thing to note, sometimes Google Analytics processes and pulls the data very quickly. Other times it doesn't. You just basically have to essentially wait for it to finish processing. Now, you'll notice here you have a list of URLs. Now, there's a ton of data in this GSA profile. But essentially, this report it uses many of the same concepts as the previous audience reports. So it gives you your dimensions, metrics, data. And what I want to show you here is how to filter. So if you see this search box right here next to the magnifying glass, this is how you're going to go into the all pages report and find your specific website. So within DAP, we capture data about so many websites, and then we organize them by agency. So to be able to find your specific, we had a stakeholder handling login.gov. You would come into this report, into the all pages report, you type in login.gov here, and then hit return, and then that's going to show you all of the login.gov pages that we've captured data about. So let's wait for this to load because I want you to see what this looks like. Okay, so here we go. So for a week's worth of data, I was able to very easily pull all the pages that have login.gov in the URL. So as a website owner on your end, when you're coming into DAP and you have a specific URL, you're going to type that in here. And that's how you're going to filter your data. Now, filters in this case, they are essentially on the fly. It's basically an on the fly kind of tool to help you sift through and identify data based on the URL string of your site. So that's what you're going to do every time you log in and try to pull reporting. Now, I know that this is an introductory course, but I do want to talk about the more advanced section here. Just very briefly. Now you'll notice here the dimension is page. That we did when we typed in login.gov in the search bar. You can go in and use some fancy regex, which is essentially to slice and dice and filter the data in a lot of different ways. Now, we're not going to talk about regular expressions in this introductory course, but there are a lot of different and interesting and complicated ways of defining what you're filtering for. So just know that if you can't find your site for whatever reason, or you're not finding the correct second level domain, for example, and you're just seeing subdomains, there are ways to only filter certain data. So let's say I just want to see login.gov. I could go into my advanced filter here and choose begins with login.gov. Now you'll see here I have secure.login.gov, etc. And let's say I only want to do a report for just login.gov. So I've updated that advanced filter, and then it's going to reprocess the data after I apply the filter. And lo and behold, it shows you now only login.gov. So tread carefully with filters, especially advanced filters. Start out just practicing with them, seeing how you can use them to manipulate data. They're very powerful. You just have to use the right logic. Now, at the DAP support line, what we typically see folks running into is they're using the wrong filter logic here. And what we would typically do is say, well, no, if you're trying to get data in such and such a format, you would have to choose one of these other options. So I recommend anyone who's getting up to speed on DAP to play with this, see what types of data it returns. And I think that's going to be a really good learning exercise for everyone on this webcast. So again, to reiterate, this is going to be one of your most often used reports. So I'm going to remove this filter real quick. Now, you'll notice here, we've got about 100,000 lines of data here. So the cool thing about Google Analytics is it also lets you choose how many rows of data that you can select. I'm not going to select all 5,000. 5,000 is basically the max that they let you show on one screen. I'm not going to select that today because it'll take forever. So I'm just going to show you, you can toggle that to show 25 lines of data. So hopefully that loads and it doesn't take too long. Okay, there we go. So we have 25 lines of data. Now you can click through and go page to page to see the next 25. And again, all of this is the same type of functionality that you will find throughout the Google Analytics interface. Now, one thing I do want to point out here, secondary dimensions. This is really interesting. So we've got our primary dimension within the All Pages report. So right here you see page. This is the URL. The page, All Pages report also gives you the option of toggling to the page title. So this is going to be the name of your page in your HTML. So it makes it very easy. Google is trying to guide you to view the data and bubble up the data that they're trying to get you to see within these reports. So you see here, there's a lot of different pages. They're no longer URLs. They're the actual name of the page, right? So I'm going to go back to page. As soon as it loads, I'll show you secondary dimensions. Now, one thing to point out here, we do get a lot of folks who are wanting to pull a full year worth of data. From an analytics perspective, that is not a good idea. You run into all sorts of issues with sampling. We'll talk a little bit about that later. It's essentially where Google only processes a subset of your data because it takes too much processing power. You'll run into issues with not having accurate data in a yearly view. So what we typically recommend you pull using the date picker at most is a month and perhaps less. So typically you don't want to pull a whole year's worth of data at a time. So I'm going to toggle this back to 10 rows so that it processes faster. And then I want to show you secondary dimensions and how powerful this report is. So we're back on page. So you can see all the URLs here. Now, the power of a secondary dimension, Google gives this to you. So you simply click on a secondary dimension to overlay an additional dimension with the page dimension. So let's say I want to look at what marketing channels are driving traffic. So you would basically just search for whatever dimension value you're looking for. And then Google will display that within this report. Now, sometimes when you will run into processing speed challenges. So that is to be expected. I'm going to choose a single day, even this, just so that we can speed this along. Okay, so we've got our primary dimension here. This is page. You will have a primary dimension in every report. Since we're looking at all pages, page is the primary dimension. Now here I've chosen a secondary dimension, channel grouping. So these are different marketing channels. We'll get into that in a little bit. You could even do, you could remove that and then choose device type. So you could actually see overlaid with all of these pages here, what device people are using to browse and consume this content. So you would just go to secondary dimension. I type in device, and then I'm going to choose device category. and Google automagically shows page as a dimension with device as a dimension. Okay, so you can see here on sam.gov desktop, you had 57,000 page views, 49,000 unique page views. You get all the engagement metrics here in this one view. So this is really showing you the power and the flexibility of Google Analytics as a tool, and how the options of slicing and dicing your data are really endless. But really, to note here, the goal here is to not go in and do reporting just for the sake of reporting. The goal is to go in here with a specific question in mind that you're trying to answer first, and then use Google Analytics to answer that specific question. So if you were to come into this pages report and just start randomly looking for random secondary dimensions, that wouldn't make too much sense. You're going to have paralysis by analysis. You're not going to know what to pull or what you're even trying to report on. So very powerful. Use it with care. But this is going to be one of your most important reports that you use for getting the pulse of engagement with your specific site. Now, a couple other things within the behavior report that I want to, behavior section that I want to call out. Content drill down. This is pretty interesting stuff too. So you'll see here page path level 1. Content drill down helps you drill down into each directory to understand a roll-up view of all the traffic for that specific directory. So how you would use this, let's say sam.gov had a section, a subdirectory of PDFs, for example. You could potentially, or they had a subsection or of blog posts. You could see a roll-up view of engagement metrics by the specific subdirectory here. So in this case, for sam.gov, it's portal. So there's a lot of interesting reports and behavior. We're not going to go through all of them, but the next report that we are going to go through is the landing page report. To the all pages report, the landing page report is also one of the most important and most often used pages that you are going to be using in your analytics work. So let's talk a bit about this. So again, this obviously looks the same as many other reports here, except we're looking at landing pages. Okay, so a landing page is a page where users from the outside of your site, whether they're coming from a marketing campaign or an external third-party site, they're clicking through, they're coming from Google search results, and then they enter gsa.gov, for example. So your session starts on a landing page. So this is a very important report for understanding how people are entering your site. Now remember, there's a lot of different ways that people can enter your site. You could enter direct by typing in your agency's URL. You enter through organic search results on Google or Bing. You could enter through social media links from Facebook or Twitter. All of these different sources of traffic send traffic to your site, and they land on a page, hence the name of this report, landing page report. Now here they also give you engagement metrics. You have the ability to filter, functionality as you do in every other report. It's just different data. And this is why it's really so important to understand the data in these reports, the data that's available, before you go in and just start randomly pulling reports. Okay, so interesting study that was done back in 2015. for government-wide landing page traffic. Only 26% of traffic entered through home pages. All the other pages, 4%, were other parts of government websites. So this shows to you the importance of the landing page report, right? A lot of traffic enters every website sideways, coming from different marketing channels, email campaigns, entering lots of different pages. Not everyone goes to the homepage, as our study showed. So this is why it's important to use the landing page report to understand how those users engage with your content and what sections are actually resonating with users, what sections resonate with users on Google search results, in email campaigns, etc. So this is going to be one of your most often used reports as well. So the landing page report is very important in addition to the all pages report. Couple thoughts on landing pages. So you're going to use landing pages really for kind of two main reasons. The first is understanding how your information architecture, link labeling, how your content is organized, how it's presented. You're going to understand how all of that resonates with your users who are landing on specific things. So the cool thing about the landing pages report, you can see bounce rate. Now remember from Tim's definition in the beginning of this deck, bounce rate is where a user lands on a page and then leaves. So I came, I saw, I puked, I left. So understanding where on your site the bounce rate is highest can help you identify issues with how your content's organized, or perhaps there isn't enough convincing text or any type of incentive for people to stay on your site and move forward and consume content. The other thing about landing pages and how it helps you is understanding navigation and usability. So this is going to be particularly helpful for UX folks on the webcast today. So you can understand when people land on pages and if they're leaving or where they're going next from the primary landing page, how that actually shows you what types of navigation change you need to make. You can use a lot of this data in the landing pages report to infer trends and then test new versions of your content, the navigation, etc. Whatever you think might be causing your users to bounce. Okay. So we've gone through a lot of material. We are going to take a 5-minute break. So everyone, we'll see you in about 5 minutes. Go get a drink of water, and we'll be back on in 5 and continue with today's deck.
Or just watch this awesome baby panda waking up, because that's cool too.
Right.
See everyone in 5 minutes.
So we're keeping it on your screen?
Hey folks, we're gonna start this back up. So hopefully everyone enjoyed the panda and the bathroom break. So we're gonna jump right back into this. Okay. So the next report that we're going to look at is the events report. Now, within DAP, we automatically collect data on a number of different events. So I'm going to show you how we do this, what the data looks like, how you can use this on your end. So we're still under the behavior section of analytics. And I'm going to go down to I'm going to close site content. And I'm going to go down to the events section. So this is where the magic happens. Okay, so same concept as all the other reports. We've got the name of the report, segments, date picker. We've got a chart here. We have kind of a roll-up view of the data that's collected. And then we have events. Now, events are any type of user interaction that happens on your site. So what are some examples of events? These could be PDF downloads. They could be outbound link clicks, outbound downloads, anchor clicks, a lot of different things. These are all user interactions that occur within the pages of your site. And DAP automatically tracks all of this, so you don't have to do anything. Now, this is a really cool feature because most organizations with websites don't have this set up. So out of the box, we're already giving you a lot of value and help with having events configured so that you can understand number of downloads of your PDF files, for example. So this is the beauty of the events report. So the report we're going to primarily talk about today is the top events report. Now, when you log into Google Analytics, you're going to go to the top events report. So let's explore this report together. Now, if you're in Google Analytics, you can obviously follow along, or you can just kind of watch our screen. But within top events, Google presents to you the event category. So how events are captured, DAP passes various labels, various values for different labels for events. So let's say you have a PDF. Google Analytics is going to receive a category value, an action value, and a label value for that PDF download. So every time somebody clicks on a PDF to download it on your site, this gets recorded in Google Analytics. So let's look up here at the primary dimension. So Google shows you out of the box in the top events report, event category. This is just simply the overall type of event, right? So you have outbound downloads, anchor clicks, etc. Now, these values might look different in your specific agency profile. It really just depends on what types of technology, what types of outbound link downloads you have on your site, etc. So let's look at downloads here, because that is a very popular question for folks when they contact us at DAP. So downloads, what do we see here? Well, over here we see total events. So this is simply the number of downloads. An event here in this context equals a download. Now you have unique events here. We're not going to go into that. That's kind of a more advanced concept. You have event value, average value. Typically, folks using DAP are going to be going into looking at event category and total events. So let's toggle over to event action. Now you'll see here, event action is simply the type of file that's being downloaded. So let's kind of review that again together. If you go to event category, click on download, you'll see the event action. Or you could simply toggle back and forth up here by selecting event action. Either way works. But let's look at PDFs. See, PDFs are categorized as outbound downloads and downloads, and it gives you the total events for PDF specifically. Now let's look at event label. This is typically going to be a value that is passed for, specifically for files, it'll be the file name. But as you can see, there are a lot of different values here, depending on whether it's an outbound link click to a different site. For example, there was a outbound link click to the va.gov site, so that gets captured here. So the label is just basically the URL of the file, of the site that you're going to. It really just varies by the type of event that we're capturing. So this is top events. This is looking at all of the user interactions that DAP captures for you out of the box. How are you going to typically use this report on a day-to-day basis? You're probably wondering, what are people downloading? So DAP has a number of files that they automatically track: PDFs, MS-DOC files, Excel files. Basically captures many different types of files. So we often get questions about total number of downloads for PDFs. The best way to learn how to do that is to play around with the top events report and understand how Google Analytics captures these pieces of data so that you can eventually learn how to manipulate and drill down into the different areas of this event report to get the data that you need.
Hey, Freddie.
Yep.
I was just wondering if you could show people clicking through the top events report, clicking through download, and then clicking on PDF to show how it can open up that specific category.
Definitely. Okay, so I'm going to go into event category. I'm going to go into download. And remember the event action that I alluded to before. This is the file type. So within the GSA agency profile, we are collecting data. We're collecting event data on all of these different file types. So there's PowerPoints. For some reason, there's an exe, an executable file. There are zip files, etc. So PDFs are the perennial, most popular file that folks want to understand about reporting on. So you drill down and you click on PDF, and that drills down further into event label. And as you can see here, we now have a bunch of different URLs of these PDFs. So you'll see here, GSA payroll calendar 2018.pdf, one of the most popular events, one of the most popular files that was downloaded. So now this is just within the GSA profile. You'll see different types of events in your own government agency profile. But this is essentially the thought process and how you actually drill down into each of these areas to get this data. So next time, when you're interested in understanding downloads, go to this top events report, play with it, and you can find this data pretty easily. Okay. So we spoke about the top PDF downloads report, so I'm going to move ahead. Okay, so I have a question for everyone on the webcast. If you include a direct link to a PDF in an email or social media post, It will not record in Google Analytics. Why is that? So if you can all answer, so we've got a multiple choice of answers here. If you can answer in the chat box, Tim will let us know what everyone thinks is the correct answer or answers. So let's just take a moment to think about that and then type in an answer.
What do you think, folks? This is a little bit of a tougher question. While I'm waiting for a few answers to come in, I just wanted to note that one person in the chat asked if they could use DAP to track outbound links on any page, in this case on nasa.gov. And I just responded, but for everyone else on the line, that understanding the basic structure of events now in a future section in just a couple minutes will teach you how to make any of these reports more specific to your particular site. But the answer is yes, you can track all the outbound link clicks from nasa.gov. Regarding the question, we have a bunch of people saying B. Looks like a lot of folks are saying B. We have a single A.
Okay. Single A. So that's the majority of folks are saying A is the answer.
The majority of folks are saying B, although there's more A's coming in.
Okay. Now remember, you could have multiple choices here as well. So it could be all of them. It could be two of them. It could be one.
We've got answers all over the board.
Okay.
So why don't you just go ahead and
all
tell
right.
us which
So
one
I heard a lot of folks chose A, and a lot of folks chose B. Correct?
Yes.
Okay. Got it. All right. So this is kind of a trick question here. So the answer here is A and B. So let's talk about that for a little bit. Let's talk about why that is. So if we unpack this question, imagine you're putting together an email campaign and you put a link to, let's say, a PDF of your agency's mission and values, for example. And this is an email going out to folks who work in your agency. They click on that link to the PDF. That PDF renders in a browser window. So what happens there with Google Analytics? Nothing. PDFs cannot execute Google Analytics JavaScript because they're files. So that's one important caveat to keep in the back of your mind. This is why we use events, is because Google Analytics JavaScript cannot execute on file types. So any type of user interaction that happens on your pages, on your site, where we cannot execute the Google Analytics JavaScript, we will execute an event. And that's how it gets recorded in Google Analytics. Okay, so let's talk about B. So this answer was also correct. The PDF was not tagged with query parameters. Now, this is an intro class. Realize most people probably don't know what query parameters are. But essentially, if you were to link to a PDF from an email, and then your users click on that email link, they go to the PDF in their browser, it renders in their browser, but that traffic shows up as direct because it didn't have query parameters, telling Google Analytics that this was coming from an email campaign. So that's why if your PDF was not tagged with query parameters, it would not be recorded in Google Analytics.
Hey, Freddie, I want to jump in here just to make sure everyone's clear. Even if you tag a PDF with query parameters, if you put the link directly to the PDF in an email or social media post, it will not record because there's no HTML behind a PDF for you to put the Google script. So linking directly to PDFs, no matter what you do, unless you have a click on an actual HTML page with that DAP tag that will download the PDF from a link, will not record.
And then option C here, links in email, social media can't be tracked in GA. That is incorrect. We could track a lot of different things. Now, these are some complex concepts. We'll be talking about campaign URLs in the upcoming slides. I'll jump into that in just a bit. Okay, so to finish off the concept of events. Now you'll remember bounce rate. We've mentioned that a couple times. So do you remember how Tim was mentioning about how much we hate having a high bounce rate? Well, in most cases, if someone visits only one page, but then they download something, so they fire an event, or they follow and click on an external link, this ends up not counting as a bounce. So what this means is, let's do an example. If you have somebody coming in from, let's say, Google search results, they land on your page, it's your about page, and then they leave that page without doing anything, that's considered a bounce. But let's say they come in from Google search results and enter your About Us page, and then they click on a PDF link and download the PDF. That's considered and classified as an event. So that means that that session, starting on that landing page, that's no longer a bounce. So that's the one caveat to remember about events and bounce rate. Events essentially change the definition of what would have been a bounce in Google Analytics. Okay, so let's jump into the who and the how question. So you'll remember I talked very briefly, high level, about the different areas of these reports. The audience tells you the who, acquisition tells you how they're finding you, how they're getting to you, behavior tells you the what. So let's go over what Google Analytics can tell you to answer the who question. Who is engaging with my website content? So what Google Analytics is able to tell you is all on the left-hand side. So I won't go through all of them, but new and returning users, language, location, etc. tell you. Now, what Google Analytics can't tell you is personally identifiable information. Now, we recommend and require that nobody include any type of PII and URLs of your site. Obviously, that's not allowed. You can't know this. We can't collect this in Google Analytics. IP addresses, you will not know these either. We mask IP addresses. You will not know the thoughts that are going through your user's head as they click through. There's no way to know that. Google Analytics is great at telling you how people are getting to your site and what they're doing, but Google Analytics doesn't tell you the why. And of course, Google Analytics is not going to know your cat's name. Google knows a lot about us, but they don't know what's going on inside of our head or your cat's name. Okay, so this is a good segue for going into acquisition reporting. So how are visitors finding me? So you remember in the report itself, we have an acquisition section. So this is going to be more of a complex section of this introductory course. So we're going to go over this. There are a lot of details. If you don't get it the first time, that's okay. This is complicated stuff. So let's jump into it. The how question. So let's talk about this. So in Google Analytics, you're asking yourself, okay, we know who our users are, what they're doing, but how did they actually find us? How did they get to us, right? That's always going to be a question that you're trying to understand. Did you have an email campaign? Did you have a social media campaign that drove users to your website? So that acquisition reporting tells you. It tells you how you're acquiring traffic and visitors. Okay, so there's a couple high-level concepts to keep in the back of your mind as you go through the acquisition reports. The first is a referral. So there's a couple default channels. We've got referral, organic, direct, social. Referral simply means referred from a third-party site. So if WashingtonPost.com links to GSA.gov and somebody clicks on that link on WashingtonPost.com, leading them to GSA.gov, that's considered a referral. Organic. This is simply traffic coming from Google search results and then entering your site. So if you search for GSA on Google, you'll see the GSA.gov pop up as the #1 result. If you click on GSA.gov, that is then captured as an organic search channel. Direct. So this is basically you go to your browser, you type in the URL in the address bar, or you've bookmarked it, and this gets captured as direct. Now, there is a caveat with direct. There is a lot of noise that gets bucketed in the direct channel. So I mentioned an email example previously. So if you are not using any type of tracking for your emails, oftentimes email traffic will get bucketed under direct. And then your email channel or your email campaign won't get any credit. So direct has a lot of noise. Take it with a grain of salt. There's usually a lot of data that is bucketed there that shouldn't be there. Now, social. This is another default channel. So this is simply Google Analytics sees various social channels, classifies them, gives you reporting on them. So this is essentially clicked from a known social media source. It could be Facebook, Twitter, Reddit, etc. So let's look briefly at the acquisition channels report. Okay, again, I'm in the overview report. You have all the same functionality and features. You have the date picker, you have segments, which we'll get into later. This is the overview. Now here are the top level marketing channels that we just went over. Now you'll see here paid search. So there's clearly some websites using paid search campaigns, email campaigns. There's an other category. A bit about the other category. So if you have an email campaign, if you have any type of campaign, it could be paid search, social, email, and it's not tagged appropriately, it could end up in an other bucket. So there's a lot of noise that you have to be aware of that could be polluting your data if you don't have a standardized way of tracking your campaigns. Okay, so let's walk through some of the other reports here. So right now I'm in acquisition. I've gone to all traffic, and then I'm going to channels. Now what's really cool about this report is it shows you the high-level default channel grouping as your primary dimension. So here you have, again, referral, direct, organic, etc. Now, it tells you all of the metrics associated with this dimension: users, new users, bounce rate, average session duration, etc. So it's a really quick and easy way to say, okay, I had a social media campaign, and I'm curious for overall social media performance for the month of January. How do I get that data? So you could come into this report and choose social. You could drill into that channel and very quickly see all the social networks where you're receiving traffic from. So a lot of traffic came from Facebook, apparently, to a GSA related site, right? There's a bunch of different sites within the GSA profile. So this is really powerful in how you can very high level understand social network performance. Now, remember I talked about secondary dimensions. Let's play around with this a bit. So if you click on secondary dimension, you can choose landing page. Remember we talked about the landing page report. You can also choose landing page as a secondary dimension and understand from your social networks, where are people landing? Now remember, a landing page is where a session starts. It's where a user is coming from an external source. So it could be a third-party site. It could be an email campaign. It could be a social media platform. So in this specific instance, we're looking at social network. And within the GSA profile, we're seeing that obviously FBO.gov received a ton of traffic for the 14th, 321 sessions, all from Facebook. So you can very quickly toggle your reporting here and see where they're coming from and where they're landing on your website. Now, if I was the webmaster at FBO.gov, I could go in here, I could say, oh, that's interesting. Who was promoting the FBO.gov index page on Facebook? Was that us promoting it? Was it somebody else who posted about our website? You could start to identify different pages on your site that drive traffic and start to identify trends that you can use to help your web strategy, your marketing campaign strategy, etc. All to say, there's a lot of data here. There's a lot of ways to slice and dice it, and it's really important. And it's going to be one of the very most important reports that you use. Okay. So let's talk a bit about direct traffic. So you'll remember, going back to the channels report, we talked about how direct traffic has a lot of noise. Now, why is that? So we've got a little pop quiz question for you. In the chat box, if you could choose from these multiple choice answers what you think the reason is why direct traffic is inflated. Now, by inflated, we mean all that extra noise that we were referring to earlier. So what is actually causing direct traffic to be inflated? If you can type that in the chat box, Tim will let us know.
Here's a hint, folks.
What folks
It's
think.
not just one of the responses. Choose as many as you'd like.
That's a great hint.
So while we're waiting for answers to come in, we can talk about sort of direct traffic theoretically would be anything that folks are typing in the URL bar or have bookmarked. That's what you would hope would be the recording of all direct traffic. We're getting very few answers in the chat box. Maybe this is confusing some folks. But congratulations to Maureen Duckworth, who is the respondent who said everything, all.
That's correct. So, folks, all of these answers are correct. And this really illustrates how complicated direct traffic is as a concept within analytics. And this really illustrates why you need to take it with a grain of salt. Direct traffic is not just users typing in the URL into the browser. It's not just users bookmarking a site. So some of these concepts here are a little more advanced, but we can briefly go over them. So clicks from shortened links. So let's say you have a link shortener that you use to post a gsa.gov link on Facebook. When somebody clicks that shortened link and then they go to the gsa.gov homepage, that will show up as direct. It won't show up as social traffic. Referrals from HTTPS to HTTP. So Google by default now uses the HTTPS protocol to protect data about you and about your web activity. So if you were to go from one site that did have HTTPS to another site that didn't, the site that doesn't have HTTPS would not know that you were actually referred from another site that had HTTPS. So These are very specific situations, but they do happen and they do inflate direct traffic. I already mentioned before, clicks from email clients. There are situations where links that have 3 can trip the referrer, making your traffic look like it's coming from the direct traffic, and as well as clicks from mobile app. Now, we don't track mobile apps in DAP. This is just one of the pieces of the puzzle that can influence and inflate direct traffic. So, well, okay. So, within acquisition reporting, we've got a couple important concepts to go over here. So, let me just go through some of the reports with you here and kind of walk through which ones we're typically using. So we went over the channels report. Now, obviously, you see the default channel grouping here. You see social, you see email. So let's talk about how to actually track different social media from email, from paid search, because that's really important. If you're not tracking consistently these external marketing campaigns, you're going to have a lot of trouble with your reporting. So how do we do that? Well, we use campaign tagging. You're going to receive these slides. It has a link to the Google Campaign URL Builder. It's a really useful tool. I'll show it to you here real quick. You can fill out the different fields. Not going to do that just yet because we're going to go do a deep dive on campaigns and really unpack this concept for everyone, because it is one of the more complicated concepts in Google Analytics. So let's talk about campaigns. So what are campaigns? You'll notice that I mentioned email, paid search, social media. So campaigns are any external marketing initiative, such as email, social media, paid search, right? In any campaign, you're always going to be including a link back to your site. So you're trying to entice or incentivize your users to go back to your site. That's the whole point of marketing, of reaching out to your audience, making sure your users know that you exist, right? You want them to land back on your page and browse and consume and engage with your content, whatever that may be. So your campaigns are used to promote your site. And within those campaigns, whether it be email or social media, etc., you're going to have that link. That link needs to be tagged. That's how we measure the success of our web campaigns. So what do I mean by tagging? So you tag your links by using campaign URLs. What are campaign URLs? They are URLs with Google Analytics campaign query parameters. So these campaign parameters are appended to your link that you would include in an email or a social media post, etc. And they instruct Google Analytics when your user clicks on that link in a social media post, it then sends it to your website. These campaign URLs instruct Google Analytics to record the data in those campaign URLs so that you can track individual email campaigns or social media campaigns. You can choose values that are meaningful to you, right? Now, here we have an example. So I've got www.mysite.com, and then we have these UTM codes. This is what is referred to as campaign URLs in Google Analytics. So you have a UTM source, you have a UTM medium, and you have a UTM campaign. So 4 primary parameters are required: URL, source, medium, and campaign. These parameters are going to tell Google Analytics, hey, this link was clicked, and all of these parameters from the UTM values need to be recorded in reporting. So let's unpack these different campaign URL parameters. So you'll see here the exact same link from the previous slide. Now I've color-coded each of these parameters with their descriptions. So let's go over what these all mean. Okay, so in the green, website URL. This is pretty self-explanatory. It's simply the page on your site where you're sending your users from an email or a social media post. The UTM source. This is going to be the referring website or the advertiser or the publication that is sending the traffic to your site. So this means where the user is coming from. Typically, you'll see in the source, in the brackets, you'll see somebody using newsletter as the source for an email campaign, or Google or Facebook. It all depends on the type of marketing campaign that you're implementing and driving traffic to your site with. Okay, let's talk about the medium. This is essentially the marketing medium through which the user is coming from. So that could be email, social, paid search. You would put one of these values in between these brackets. You would not include the brackets, just to be clear. This is just as an example where you would put the value. And finally, let's talk about UTM campaign. This is just simply a unique name of your marketing campaign that you use to differentiate different campaigns. Now, one caveat here, you do not want to use the same campaign URL for every marketing campaign. Otherwise, you won't be able to tell the difference. Okay. So for every marketing campaign, you need a unique URL with unique parameters. Now, a couple things to note about this. These values that you input, where the source, medium, and campaign brackets are, these are not case sensitive. However, the best practice is to use lowercase. Whatever you choose, you need to be consistent. Otherwise, if you have a team member that decides to use a lowercase email in the UTM medium, and another team member that decides to use an uppercase E with email in the UTM medium, you'll have two separate lines of data. So that's very important because that's going to pollute your data if you don't have a consistent tagging strategy. So let's talk about what this data looks like in Google Analytics. But before that, let's talk about the campaign URL builder. So let's do an example here in Google's tool. So let's say you're doing state.gov. Now you'll notice here, Google's campaign URL builder shows you various fields here to fill out. Now they only require 2, but we recommend using 4. So you're going to be using website, source, medium, and campaign. So you'll see here, it aligns with the campaign URL tagging strategy: website, source, medium, campaign name. So let's talk about a use case where state.gov has an email campaign. Let's say they're trying to promote an anniversary of a council. So let's talk about the source here. So where the user is coming from. So since we're doing an email campaign, you could say that the source, let's say it's a newsletter. As I would type in newsletter in the campaign source. Since this is an email campaign, the UTM medium value, I'm just going to choose email. And for the UTM campaign name, I'm going to choose a unique value so that I know how to differentiate that in the reports. I'll show you how to do that in a second. So I'm going to choose something about council anniversary. Just going to call it council anniversary 2018. I could also put the date there too. February 14th, 2018. Okay, so now we have all the primary parameters. And now you'll notice at the very bottom here, you'll see a generated campaign URL that Google does for you to make it super easy. So you could copy this URL. If you wanted to, you could obviously do HTTPS. So you would copy this URL, and then you would include it in the email campaign for any link that you want to use in your email campaign. So now when the user goes and clicks on this link in the email campaign, this page fires Google Analytics JavaScript, and you'll see here the UTM values show up in the URL and instruct Google Analytics to report this data, to report these UTM values to Google Analytics so that it shows up under acquisition reporting. And you can see what this looks like by going to campaigns. So this is another good report to go to. So under campaigns, it breaks it down by campaign, source, medium. Now remember, those align with source, medium, campaign. So this is how you decipher the campaign logic of your tagged URLs from various marketing campaigns. So now this is in the GSA profile, so we don't necessarily know or did these campaigns ourselves, but you can see here, we're looking at campaign. Remember, this is very unique. You can choose whatever you want, basically. So I couldn't tell you what all of these mean, but if this is what you would see when if you were to go in and look at the these campaign URL values. So I could look for council anniversary 2018-02-14 here in this campaign dimension. Now, if you toggle here a medium, you can look for the medium. So remember, the medium here was email. So you see here, email shows up as the medium. You can drill down into medium, but that doesn't really give you a ton of information. More importantly, you can start to build reports using the secondary dimension. So you could pull up medium and source, or you could just pull source and medium all in one fell swoop. And you could start to identify your specific campaign based off of these campaign parameters that you tagged your links with. So if you had a social media campaign that you wanted, and you could, in theory, look at just source and medium, or any combination of these dimensions, and type Facebook, assuming you included it there in the tagging, which it has not been done here. But in theory, you'd be able to pull up that data just by filtering, just by searching here. Okay. It's a complicated concept. A lot of analysts still mess it up, even after many years. Getting multiple people to align on this is challenging, especially within an agency where there are multiple people, multiple stakeholders driving different campaigns. But this is a very important concept for you to keep in the back of your mind as you go through your analytics training and getting up to speed on this. So again, this report is under acquisition, campaigns, all campaigns. And I highly recommend you get in there, just play around with it. You're not going to break it. Click around, see what data is there. And you can always reach out to us with any questions on how to decipher campaign URLs.
Just wanted to jump in and add one thing, Freddie. One of the coolest parts about campaign URLs is that you can then shorten it and it will record properly. So if you're using Bitly or Owly, I know there's probably folks on the line using social media tools like that shorten your URLs. Just as a reminder on that, you can shorten the URLs with the campaign parameters, and then you will start recording the data that you specify.
Yep, it's a great point. Okay, so my time is coming up soon, so I am going to move through reports here. The additional reports I wanted to go through briefly with everyone. Let's look at referral traffic report. Okay, so this is the referrals. Now you'll remember that we spoke about referrals earlier. These are typically third-party sites that have linked to your site. Users go to that site, and then they click the link and they end up on your site. So this is third-party traffic coming to your site from other domains. And you'll see here in source, these are other domains coming to various GSA websites. So you'll see here NOAA.gov was the third most trafficked, third largest referral sending traffic to the GSA. So this is a helpful report for finding of, let's say, newspapers or publications that you might view as being important for your brand awareness, for your agency, for example. You could find that here. You can easily go in and search for Washington Post or New York Times or whatever site you think might be sending you traffic. This is how you identify it. Now, how you identify your specific site, we'll get into that a little bit later with segments, realizing that this is a very complicated topic here. Okay, another important report, organic search. Okay, so remember we had channels here. Remember, organic search itself is a channel. So this report shows you keywords driving traffic in Google search results to your site. So imagine going to Google. You type in passport renewal. In theory, it would show you State Department. But clearly here within the GSA profile, for some reason, the GSA got traffic from this particular keyword. So organic search and understanding your organic search kind of keyword mix is really important for optimizing your content, understanding what content is important to your users. So this is a really quick and easy way to go in and understand your users. Now, this is only 1 day's worth of data. Now, you'll notice here, not provided. When Google moved fully to HTTPS, they stripped the keyword that used to be tracked by Google Analytics. So what does this mean? For the majority of traffic, you may be able to see keywords. Now, clearly we do see some keywords for some sites in the GSA profile. But for the majority of it, 97.71%, you won't know what keywords are being searched for, which then result in traffic to your site. So what does this all mean? Google wants to protect your privacy as a user, so they encrypt your searches. So that's not very helpful to us, though, right? Trying to understand how to optimize our content to capture organic search visitors. That's really important for everyone's website. So there is a tool that you can use to get around that challenge. So we've talked about the search keyword report. Let's talk about the Search Console report. So Search Console is a separate tool. It is not in DAP. And I'll tell you why in just a second about why it's not. So Search Console looks like this. Tool which provides you with how Google looks at your site, how it crawls your site, how it ranks your site. It lets you know any technical issues, lets you know what rank position you're showing up for specific pages on your site or specific queries on your site. So account with Search Console, this particular keyword is showing up as number one, as the number one result here. So it gives you access into how Google is seeing and thinking about your site. So this is a good way, this is a good proxy to understand when you have 97% of your keywords not being hidden by Google, you can go into Search Console and get 90 days worth of data on what types of keywords people are actually using to search in Google and then find your site. And then you can use this data to make decisions about how to optimize your content. Now, I'm not going to play with all these features here, but all you need to do is Google Search Console and set it up in your site. Now, the cool thing is you can start to integrate that with your analytics only if you have an independently managed Google Analytics account. We cannot integrate Search Console for your specific site because you can only connect one account. And if we were to connect a Search Console account to DAP, you would have incorrect data populating throughout everyone's profile across the whole federal government. So that is why we do not support that. But you're more than welcome to set it up for your own independently managed Google Analytics account. So in our deck, I'm including a link to this tool. It's great for developers, product managers, anyone who manages the technical aspects of your site. But it's also great for the market folks or for content folks in understanding what's important to your users in terms of content. So that's the difference between the search keyword report, keyword query report. Okay, so we've had a lot of material. You're all doing great. Let us know if you have any questions. Feel free to submit any questions in the chat, and we can answer some of those now. If there's any burning questions, we're happy to look at those now. If not, in a couple minutes, we'll kick it over to Tim. First, let's take a quick break, and then we're going to sprint to the finish.
Yeah, so we're going to take a 5-minute break, come back at 3:20. We'll have a half an hour left where I'm going to try to show you how you can use custom reports and segments to do all the stuff we just showed you, but create it for your own specific site. Because I know you've all been thinking that. How do I get information just for my specific site? That's the last half hour. So we hope to see you all. And we'll go ahead and just answer questions directly in the chat in the sake of time. So see you back at 3:20. All right, folks, let's bring this thing home. You've already had to ingest a lot of information, but I promise you we saved the best for last. I'm going to show you now how to use segments and custom reports, and I think that's the most powerful aspect of DAP, because that's going to allow you to actually specifically look at information about your site, the one you work on, which is one of the major questions we get. So, segments. What do segments do? Basically, when you're looking at data, this is like an interesting little cartoon. Unsegmented users look all the same. They look like whoever. You might have pages, page views, and all the page views look like a page view. But with segmented data, it actually allows you to put sort of filters across all the reports so that you can get information about your target audiences. So that means we can say, if you wanted to compare mobile versus desktop users, you could create segments for mobile and desktop sessions, and then you could compare those to see maybe if you did a mobile redesign or something like that, where you're trying to get information. Additionally, we can segment for sessions for a specific host name, which I think is going to be really powerful for everyone. So remember that landing page report that we had? Let me go over here and open it. And it's under, wow, look at that. My Google Analytics account literally just changed. There we go. It's got analysis now. That's a new feature. So we'll have to do some research on that and find out what it means for you. But let's go back to the landing page report. Of course, Google decides to be slow for me today. So, okay, we've got our landing pages. As you will see, we're in the GSA profile. It contains data for all GSA sites. We've got GSA Advantage, we've got USA.gov, we've got FBO, we've got SAM.gov. Well, what if I only work on USA.gov and I really only care to see data for that particular site? So, as we look up here, we've got these rectangles. You can see that we've got all users as the default. If I click on Add Segment, it then gives me options for all kinds of fun things. On the left-hand side here, if I click System, it's got all the different preloaded segments that you can choose from Google Analytics. You can choose new users. You can choose traffic that comes from organic, from a search engine. You can choose all kinds of different things, tablet traffic, tablet and desktop, and so on and so on. So for example, if I were to put on, before I show you how to do a specific site, if I were to put on mobile traffic here and hit apply, hopefully the loading won't be too bad. What you'll see, hopefully, when this segment loads, is that I'll have all users and I will have mobile users both showing. And then in the actual landing page report, it will show me a comparison between the two. Now, one thing we should remember with all users here is that that's encompassing everyone from both mobile and desktop. So this particular segment is specifically mobile, so it constitutes a portion of what you see here. And this is really classic, by the way, the fact that if we look at mobile traffic alone in this orange line, it's pretty consistent. Whereas if you're looking at all users, the desktop takes big dips in the weekends. And if I were to create a segment for just desktop traffic, which I can do, you'd see this even more pronounced, because right now this blue line includes the mobile traffic. So it would be huge dips on weekends. But as you can see, once we do that, it now shows me all users versus mobile traffic for every landing page, which is really nice if you're trying to compare, mobile versus desktop, for example. So I can go back and remove this one. We just click on the little arrow here and go down to remove. It'll go back to just all users. Then what I'm going to do is actually change it so that the all users segment is no longer applied. I'm going to get rid of it, and the segment I'm going to apply is going to be one that I build myself. And I'm going to show you how you can specify sessions for a specific website. Okay, so now if I click on all users, oh, of course, excuse me one moment. Apologies for that. Of course, the phone has to ring while I'm giving you the presentation. So let me go back here. And if we go into new segment, we then have the ability to take a look at various different things we can choose. So you can segment by demographics, you can segment by technology. If we can create a segment, for example, where people are on the Google Chrome browser coming from California. And you could do all kinds of different combinations. If you'd like, you can look at traffic sources. So this is where you could specify a specific campaign. For example, if you use campaign URLs that Freddie just told you about, and then you have your campaign names and you know what they are, you can, for example, I know that there's a campaign called Plus Education. You can then actually segment for that specific campaign and only look at traffic from users that came from your campaign outreach. This is a super, super powerful segment for folks that are in outreach, if you work in social media or things like that. Being able to segment by those campaigns really gives you insight into what people are looking at based on your different outreach sources and mediums. Okay, but I'm going to get rid of that because that's not what we're doing right now. Instead, I'm going to go down to advanced conditions. At advanced conditions, you have the ability to filter by sessions or users. I'm going to stick with sessions. And you can include or exclude. So in this case, I'm going to change this dimension right here. You can click on the down arrow, and I'm going to change the dimension to hostname. So now we say hostname, sessions include hostname contains. I'm going to actually switch it from contains to exactly matches. Because if I said contains, and what I'm going to use for my example here is USA.gov. If I said contains USA.gov, it would also include all the subdomains. So it would include gobierno.usa.gov, publications.usa.gov, kids.usa.gov, and so on and so on. If I really want to focus on a specific site, you need to use exactly matches, and you can put that in. So now I'm going to call this USA.gov traffic up here, and we can hit save. My goodness, Google's deciding to be a little bit of a pain today. There we go. Okay. So I'm going to remove the all users, and then it's going to give me USA.gov traffic only. So that is how we can take a look at our landing page, and if we only care about the USA.gov site, instead of having to search in the search bar for the different particular pages that you are interested in, or search for USA.gov and get everything that appears there, we can just have this segment applied. And the beauty of having a segment applied, as you can see here now, here's all the most popular USA.gov landing pages. The beauty of having a segment applied is that it applies across all of the reports on the left-hand side. So everything Freddie showed you, I'm not going to do it now because Google's taking a long time to load, but you could go to the all pages report. You could go to your acquisition campaigns report, your channels, source medium, all that really good stuff. And once you apply this segment, it'll just stay there until you remove it. So really, really super powerful way for you to just be able to filter this data for the site that you like or that you work on. We like all federal government sites, I hope. But beyond this, you can actually set up, as I noted, specific parameters within the segment, notwithstanding that you already set the like USA.gov or state.gov or whichever host name interests you. You could say USA.gov mobile visits, USA.gov desktop, USA.gov Chrome, USA.gov Internet Explorer. There's really a whole world that you can get into when you're creating your own segments. When you create that new segment, and then you can go down and check all the different things that you want. Some agencies may have interest in specific demographics. Some might have interest in maybe regions, geographic regions by state or something like that. And you could have different segments looking at different states. There's really quite a bit you can do. But again, just to reiterate, if you want to get your own site in a segment, conditions, host name, and then usually you would choose exactly matches. It depends on what you're looking for, but exactly matches, and then you would put in your host name there. So that is a really crash course on segments. As Freddie noted before, the best way to learn it is to go ahead and create a bunch yourself. One thing to note about segments is that when you create a segment, it is visible only to you. So it's not something that everyone can see, but you can actually share segment configurations. So you could, I think I can do it here. Let me get out of here, cancel. So if I click on this little down arrow, I can hit share. And then with share, it gives me a specific URL to import the template for the segment. So you can take this URL and send it to any other user who has access to Google Analytics, and they can apply it, and they can then use that particular segment. So if you talk to someone who maybe is not as savvy and hasn't actually or doesn't have the ability to make the segment themselves, you can create the segment and send them the template, and then they can apply it. Okay, now custom reports. We have about 20 minutes left. I'm going to crash course through custom reports. These are super, super valuable, and there's a few different kinds. But additionally, we have a 1-hour webinar that we did specifically on custom reports, and I have the link here included in the slides. You can then go to it and get a better understanding, along with many, many other trainings that we've done. We have a 1-hour webinar specifically on campaign URLs, a 1-hour webinar on segments and reports. So all that information will prove helpful to you. So here are the 4 different kinds of custom reports that we have in the DAP Google Analytics account. An Explorer report, a flat table report, a map overlay, and a funnel report. The Explorer report is pretty much what you've already been seeing in the interface. So what Explorer means is that you click on something and it drills down into a new dimension, but you can only see one dimension at a time. So let's talk about that a little bit and create a report. If I go into customization on the top of the left-hand nav, and I click custom reports, and I click new custom report, we're going to recreate that landing page report specifically for USA.gov. But what's nice about custom reports is that you can add metrics or dimensions of your choice. You're not limited to the standard report options that Google gives you. So for example, in this one, maybe I want to know sessions. I can choose that. And average time or average session time, average session duration, and what's one other one? We'll get bounce rate, because landing page with bounce rate is a good idea. So we can see here in the type, I'm choosing Explorer. I've got the 3 metrics I chose. Now I need to see what I want to be my dimension drill downs. By drill down, meaning every time we click, it will drill into the next dimension. So we want to start with landing page because we're making a landing page report. Then I want to know where this traffic come from. So my next one might be source medium. And you'll start to, as you just play with Google Analytics, you'll start to know the terminology more, and you'll know what the different dimensions are, and it'll be much easier. But if you don't, you can always just kind of look through and look at all the different options and try to find the one that matches. You will, while doing this and learning custom reports, you will definitely get reports that flatline and won't give you any data. That's normal. Don't get discouraged. Still happens to me all the time. You just have to keep playing with it until you figure out the correct combination. Okay, so we're going to start with landing page. If I click through a landing page, it's going to tell me the source medium for how people got to that page. Then let's say if they were a referral, maybe the last thing I want to know is full referrer, which would be the entire URL of the place that led the session to our site. Okay. And notice you've got these little dots. You can change the order if you'd like. Now, the bread and butter part is down here at the filter. This is where we basically do the same thing we just showed you for segmentation. We're going to say we want to filter where the host name is exactly USA.gov. And Freddie spoke a little while ago about regular expressions. And we have a whole training on regular expressions you can view, but you could also use regular expressions to include more than one site. So you might be able to use regular expressions to include USA.gov and another site that was of interest. So here's what we've got. A report that shows me columns of sessions, average session duration, and bounce rate that starts by showing me landing page URL, and then we drill down into these other dimensions, specifically filtering for host name is USA.gov. I'm not sure what my date range that I have on here right now is. Last 30 days. So here's our report. We have a landing page report specifically for USA.gov, and we've got the specific metrics that we specified. And you can see when people land here on branches of government, the bounce rate is a little bit higher. When people land on the post office, the bounce rate is much lower. And you can see how much of the percentage of total sessions these things make up. So in this case, the homepage for USA.gov only gets 12.96% of the sessions. That's pretty low. We definitely talked about the fact that traffic comes in sideways a lot, but that's a quite low homepage number. So now let's say unclaimed money. This is always a popular section on USA.gov. If I click through this and drill down, it's going to show me where those people came from because I set my next dimension as source medium. So the majority of them came from Google searches, but there's also moneyfinderusa.central.com, usunclaimedmoneysearch.com, findunclaimedmoney.net, all a bunch of very interesting different places that are directing traffic to that particular page. Now, I even set a third dimension to drill down into where we could go and look at the specific pages. So if I click through on Money Finder USA Central, it will then expand into showing me this is the actual page, the apply step results page on Money Finder USA Central that directs people to the page at USA.gov that I clicked through. So that's an Explorer report. You go from you see one dimension at a time. You can use the option of adding a secondary dimension, but it takes your data and distills it so that every time you click on a row, it will only look into that row. This information that we're seeing only applies to the landing page of USA.gov/unclaimed money. It is not a big list of all the different referrers for all the pages because we explored, we clicked through and drilled down through the different aspects of it. So that's an Explorer report. And it's sort of the default report that you see in all the other sections here. Okay, the next type, the flat table report. This is really cool because it shows you more than one dimension at a time. This is the kind of report that is very handy if you want to export your data and use it in spreadsheets or things like that. It usually has many, many more rows than an Explorer report. And the reason for that is when you have more than one dimension shown in a report, the data, every row of data will constitute a unique combination of those dimensions. So if I have, actually, it's better just to show you. Let's go to edit, and I'm going to take the same report that I created, but instead of having it be an Explorer report, I'm just going to go up here and click Flat Table. It's going to change the configuration a little bit, and we're going to see the exact same dimensions and metrics, but they got flip-flopped, and I still have my filter on, include, hostname, exact, USA.gov. And let's see how this changes the report. So now, instead of seeing a specific page that I drill down into, every unique combination is broken out into its own row. So USA.gov/passport coming from a Google search is the #1 driver of sessions. And you can see we have sessions in descending order here. You could also click on these other columns to sort by those columns. But #2, in terms of landing page with a combination of this particular aspect, is a Google search for clicking on USA.gov/post office. It looks like the search engines are a really big factor, and that's probably the case across most government sites, for the landing pages. And I could expand this a little bit. There is one here for this unclaimed money from Money Finder USA Central as a referral. That is the only one in the top 10 from an actual referral. But this is different in that we can now get a more bird's eye view of how the sessions for landing pages play out when you're looking at all the different dimensions you set. And you could set any dimensions you want. You could set geographic dimensions, dimensions for technology, what kinds of operating systems people are visiting on. This is just an example of one report that I feel is particularly useful. And you can see down here we have 100,000 rows of data because each page, here's an example. You see #1 is the passport page. #7 is also the passport page. But this one is the passport from Google, and this one is the passport from Bing. So Bing constitutes 65,000 sessions. Google constitutes 292,000 sessions. But it's all there and ranked for you. Up here, you can actually export the files into a PDF, or this is where you can do an unsampled report. And I'm going to talk about that in just a minute. I only have 15 minutes, so I need to keep moving. You can export into a Google Sheet or Excel. You can also get a PDF which looks just like this. One caution, if you export a report, make sure you expand the rows to the amount of data you want to be included. Because if you just have a report with 10 rows in it and you export it, it'll only actually give you the 10 rows. So you need to expand the reports into a larger section before you export them. Okay, that's a flat table. The map overlay, I'm not even going to show you. I'm just going to talk about it. It's only useful for location. And basically, all it does is give you options to choose for metrics that you're interested in seeing. And then it will lay it over a map. And the map can be of the whole world. It could be of the United States. It could be whatever you need. But it's basically a normal geographical explorer report with the extra feature of having an interactive map. But I don't personally use it a lot. If you have a lot of location stuff or you need to show something in a meeting and you want it to be interactive, it might be interesting for you to check out. The last one I want to show you is the funnel report. This report is really special because it's only available in Google Analytics 360. So if you're using an independent Google Analytics free account, you won't have access to the funnel report. It's a specific feature of paying for the premium version. Now, what's great about the funnel report is it actually allows you to track how users move through a site when you have an intended journey path. So I'm going to switch just because I know that there's a good one to show you in the Department of Education profile. Okay, let me find it here. Okay, so before I get into showing you what this report shows you, let's take a look at what it's made up of. What the funnel report allows you to do is set various different stages where you can create a behavioral flow. So in this case, this particular report is a report for collegescorecard.gov, which is a Department of Education site that basically gives information about various different colleges and universities for potential students. What they wanted to know was how many folks land on the homepage, do a search that's not by school name, look at a school, go back to the search results, and click on another school. So this is a very specific journey path. It's saying we don't want people to look for a school by name. Maybe they're looking by region, maybe they're looking by degree. Then they read information about a school, go back to the search results and click on a different one. So here's how they set it up. And again, this is covered more in depth in our custom reports webinar that we have on YouTube. The first step, landing on the home page. Landing page exactly matches, they put the home page. The second step, perform a search other than by name. Now this is where it gets a little more complicated. They use some regular expressions here, but it's include the page has the word search in it, but exclude if it has name in it. That's very specific to their taxonomy. It basically is just a step that says they're performing a search, but not by the school name. Then they have a section here where they're clicking on a specific school, and that's done with regular expressions because their URL taxonomy makes it so that anything including school is information about a school. They go back to the search, and they click on a second school. So if you have just 5 pages that you're interested in people moving to, or you can actually also use an event. So if your end goal is to have someone download a PDF file, you can include that as part of your steps and see if they actually download it. And if you have further questions on this, because this is a little more advanced, we're definitely always here to help you at our support email address. But here's why this report is great. There were, in the last 30 days, 52,000 people that started on step 1. From there, a little less than half of them did not make it to step 2. This doesn't mean they left the site. It means that they didn't go directly to step 2. So maybe they did perform a search, but by a school name. 61% of the folks performed the search not by the school name. So we're down to 32,000. Then 64% of those folks moved on to click a school. 40% of those moved to step 4, back to the search results, and 57% of those make it to a second school. It's a little grayed out here. I wish there were more contrast. But if you can see, it actually has the number of the total amount that started on step 1 here. But you also get to see what the drop-off rate is at each step. So we know in this case, the step where the least amount of people went through the desired path was at step 3 to 4. Only 40% made it through. But we can see at the end here, 9% of the folks that started on step 1 followed the path all the way through step 5. So if you have intended journey paths for your site, this is your report. And you can set up many of them. I do believe you're only allowed 5 steps. But if you have, let's say, an online form, you can create something like this, and you can see where people are dropping off your form. It will definitely point out areas where you want to try to address for better user experience. So this report is one of my favorites. If you have intended journey paths, I really recommend that you use it. We took a look at these. So the question that we want to keep in mind here when analyzing traffic type is that don't forget that direct traffic's inflated. If you don't have a very simple URL like USA.gov does, but if you're working on a site that's like something that's pretty complicated, there's a very low chance that a lot of people are coming there by direct traffic. Keep in mind that all those things inflate direct traffic. When you have the ability, use campaign URLs. Don't shorten links without using campaign URLs. Take into account that if your site is still HTTP, which it probably shouldn't be at this point because I think there's a directive requiring all federal government sites to be HTTPS. But if it is, you'll lose referrals from secure sites as well. So just take direct traffic with a grain of salt unless you're taking all the necessary precautions to make sure you track everything correctly. Okay, we went through these reports. Sampling. Okay, in the last couple minutes here, we talked briefly about sampling, but what happens is if you're trying to sort through a bunch of data, as in many days worth of data, or you're getting very granular with your filters, you might encounter sampling. I can try to make it happen here. Like if I try to pull 2 years worth of data, you might see a sample. I'll let that load in the background. The more specific and you get with your reports, the higher the sampling possibility, as well as if you begin filtering for a really long period of time. And here is where you see if things are sampled. So I'm not sure if you noticed, but when I ran this report the first time, that little shield was green. If that shield turns yellow, you can hover over it. And right now it's telling me this report, because I sent it back 2 years, is based on less than 0.01% of sessions. This is definitely not something you want to rely on. This is a really extreme example because I wanted to make sure it had a high sampling rate. But you always want to keep an eye out for this green and yellow shield. Sometimes the shield turns yellow just because you're applying a filter, but it'll tell you that. If you see this report is based on whatever percentage of sessions, and it's lower than, I would say, 70 or 80%, you probably want to do an unsampled report. And the way you would do that is go to Export and hit Unsampled, and then it'll give you the option to have you emailed when the report is finished. So then Google will go in the background, and depending on how complicated your report is, it may take 2 minutes, it may take 2 hours. But when it's finished, it will send you an email, and you can access the report here under Unsampled Reports. So this is really, really beneficial. The one thing about unsampled reports that's different than the rest of the way Google Analytics works is that all unsampled reports are visible. So if you're any user, you can go into the unsampled reporting section and you can see which unsampled reports have been run at a specific agency. So I don't think there'd be any reason that you wouldn't want anyone to see the reports you're running, but keep in mind that for some reason, when you do an unsampled report, they appear in this section for everyone to see. Versus when you just create a custom report, these are only visible in my account. You all will not see these custom reports when you are looking in your specific account. So if you want to share one of these, just like you would with a segment, you'd go in the custom report section. Now, this is kind of tricky because you don't actually go to the report itself. You just go in the overview, and under actions, you can click share template link, and it will give you the link just like with the section or with the segment, where you can copy and paste that, send it to somebody, and then they can apply the template that you set. Now, how is this different than sending an export report? An export report is a snapshot in time. Whatever date range you had set in your custom report, if you export it into a PDF or into a Google Sheet, it's going to only show you data for that time. If you send someone a template that you create, for example, the college scorecard funnel we just saw, they created that template and wanted other people to be able to use that template but edit it for different date ranges, maybe change one of the steps. They could send it in the version of a template like this, and it would be editable to anyone who came to see it afterward. Okay, so arrow link to the finish here. When trying to choose key performance indicators, this is something we've tried to weave throughout the entire presentation. Don't choose things at random. Don't choose single metrics. Ask yourself, what's your agency's mission? What are your site's goals that contribute to that mission? What questions are you trying to answer? Who's going to receive this report? And how can this data influence the approach? So if you're trying to understand how you can make the experience better for a user, what are the main things that are going to contribute to that? And then choose your key performance indicators based on that. I can't tell you how many times I talk to folks in government who say, oh yeah, we use Google Analytics. We send a report once a month to my supervisor. And I say, great, what does your supervisor do with it? And they say, well, they look at it and then it goes away. And there's no real purpose in reporting if action isn't going to be taken from it. So I encourage you all to strategize, use campaign URLs, get your management on board that this information is really powerful. I'm not really going to talk about dashboards because we don't have enough time. And also dashboards, the problem with dashboards is that they don't tell you when they're sampling. So the section for dashboards, if you want to explore it yourself, is in customization. It allows you to sort of look at various different, you can try to create widgets and set various different things. But I'm not a big fan because they don't have that little shield, and I want to know when data is being sampled. So that's the reason I don't really use reports or dashboards. I showed you how you can export reports. You can also email them. So pretty much any report that you're in, if I just go to, let's say, the audience overview, If this was a report you wanted to send by email, we got to get rid of the USA.gov traffic here because we're in the Department of Education profile. You can hit save. Oh, save will share it. But if you share it here, you can then say, okay, I want to send this to whomever, and you can choose the frequency that it sends. What's interesting about this is that it will actually adjust the date range based on what you said. So if your report's set up for a month and you set it monthly, it will actually send the data and update the date range every time. So that's an interesting option. I prefer to actually pull the reports myself, but you can create a report once and then email it to multiple people. As I noted, there's a huge difference between just reporting and doing analysis of that data. I can't emphasize enough that we really need to be focusing on strategies and goals rather than just, quote unquote, pulling numbers. Page views aren't the be all end all. Bounce rate isn't the be all end all. Try to think more deeply about these things, put them in context, and let's try to use this tool to improve the experience for all of the public that's visiting federal government websites. Okay, any last questions? Freddie, have folks been asking things?
We don't have a ton of questions, but we're happy to take them right now. If anyone has anything, please put it into the chat box.
Okay, great. Well, we can answer things in the chat box. Since we're right up at the end of time, I'll just go through the last few slides here. We've included a bunch of links to our past training, and additionally, you can get to the whole playlist. We've also included various different content about DAP and things that you can look at for more information. But really, any questions, feel free to email us, dap@support.digitalgov.gov, and we're happy to include or assist you in any way that we possibly can. We've got some support and some definitions and some common blogs if you want to read about various different analytics issues. With that, I want to thank everyone. We managed to get just under the wire at 4 o'clock here. You may have been able to notice that I was hustling towards the end, but I hope that this proved useful for everyone. Again, we're going to send out these slides and a survey to all the attendees afterward. If you could please fill that out and let us know what you liked, what you didn't like, what we can improve on. We're really, really appreciative of that feedback because we do use it to try to make these sessions as good as we possibly can. So I think it's about time to wrap up. I will, on behalf of Freddie and Janelle and Cece on the DGU team and myself, thank you once again for spending the last 3 hours with us. We hope it proved useful, and we also hope that you'll come back for some of our shorter 1-hour trainings that we're offering in the coming months. You can see those on digitalgov.gov. Have a great long weekend, everyone.